Good morning, sir. Thanks very much for speaking to me.
My pleasure.
It's a pleasure to speak to you, both as a book reader and as a bookseller. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
How did Benediction's story come to you and the characters you used to tell it?
Well, I had some false starts getting into this book, and it took quite a while to recognize those as false starts. But in each of the false starts, there was an old couple out at the edge of town that I began to be more and more interested in. And the other part of the stories faded away and were unnecessary. But the old couple at the edge of town stayed with me, and of course they turned out to be Dad and Mary Lewis. And the more I thought about them and imagined myself into their lives, they became clear to me. And of course, with fiction, people always have to have trouble, and their trouble is very obvious. Dad, Lewis.
Their trouble's significant, yes.
Yeah, we know that in the first page, and so around them, of course, they have to have a family, and family members have their own problems and issues, and the neighbors would be significant in this story, and also in little towns. Then it's not uncommon for a minister to come and call on somebody who's dying. So it seemed natural to invent somebody like Reverend Lyle for this story.
That does make a lot of sense. Actually, I'm calling to you from a big city, but I've lived in a small town, and a lot of it seemed very pitch perfect to me.
Uh-huh.
I find that although your novels do take place in such a specific setting in Holt, the stories themselves are pretty universal, and I would expect that urban readers can take away just as much as rural readers. But what does placing your novels in a fictional setting accomplish for you?
Well, let me comment on what you just said. I hope that's exactly true. The more I've centered my stories in Holt, the more Holt seems to be any town or every town.
Mm-hmm.
And that what happens there happens universally and fundamentally. I'm encouraged to think so, that by the fact that, for example, a Korean publisher just bought Benediction, and so there must be something that appeals to people everywhere. I hope there is, obviously.
It's a universal story.
I hope so, yeah. Of course, obviously, people are dying everywhere, and people have to take care of the dying. And your question had to do with the fictional setting. Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm. I just wondered why you chose to do a fictional place to set your books instead of somewhere that actually exists.
Well, it allows me all kinds of latitude. I don't have to rely on geography that's on an actual map. The map is in my mind, and I can invent things that I need for that place. I've been setting all my stories in Holt since I was 30, I guess. And it's the part of the world I grew up in. It's the part of the world I seem to know best, and it's certainly the part of the world that I have the most intense emotional response to. And so I can invent a town and a county out in eastern Colorado that is prompted by my memories of that place. And so once I've invented it, then I don't have to do that again, and I can return there over and over, and I think I can tell all the stories I want to tell and set them right in that town. I feel as if I know everybody in the town and county, all the dogs, all the bicycles, all the pickups, all that kind of thing. So it's become absolutely specific to me and very clear to me what's in that county, what's in that town. And I keep referring back to certain sort of iconic details of that place. The Main Street, the false fronts of the businesses, the water tower, the railroad tracks, the highway, the grain elevators, the gravel roads out in the country, the pastures, the cornfields. All those things are details that have become dear to me, and I can return to them with some kind of fondness every time I write about this place.
It's funny, actually. I think the reader probably feels the same way about it. I can picture the town myself. It's a colleague or a friend of mine actually referred to Holt as your Yoknapatawpha or your Gibbsville. And it was also a pleasure to me to find when you found characters from Plainsong referred to in this novel. It was a nice thing to find.
I'm sorry. I thought I would make a little backward glance at those at the McFarland brothers and Victoria Rubidoux and so on. Yeah.
There's people I pushed this book on. They hadn't read that novel, so this didn't mean as much to them as it did to me. But they're going back to find Plainsong now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is there a chance that we see any recurring characters in the next one? I assume it's going to be in Holt as well?
It'll be in Holt, but I don't anticipate there being the same characters. The only time that's really happened to any degree was with Plainsong and Eventide. Mm-hmm. Before I finished Plainsong, I knew that I knew more about the McFerrin Brothers story than I could get into that first book, so I began to write Eventide almost immediately after I got done with Plainsong. But I've never had that experience before, and I don't anticipate it happening again. The book I'm trying to get started now is going to be really completely unrelated to those other books. But I think of not exactly as a trilogy, but those three books as being sort of at least all of the same tone, maybe, and the same treatment. They're united by that, maybe.
It's true, and I talk about them to people. I tell them I don't call it a series because it isn't exactly a series, but they're definitely linked somehow. And yes. I was curious if there was going to be more.
Yeah.
I think what I like, to be honest with you, this one of all of them is my favorite, and I like all of them quite a bit. But what I like most about this one, I think, is the honesty about both about how life is lived and as well as the conclusion of it. And although Dad Lewis is a very admirable character, we realize through the course of the book that he's made mistakes in his life. Was it hard to portray such human dimensions in your portrayal of him?
Well, I tried to do it as well as I could, of course. And I wanted him to be a conflicted human being, somebody who's complex and certainly not all of one piece. I wanted him to, in his dying in that summer, to have time to have enough reflection to have a kind of transformation and a kind of redemption, maybe. Certainly he has come to understand that he has made a horrific mistake with his son, and he would like to be forgiven by his son, but that's not going to happen. Even in his vision, where Frank comes back to him, even in that vision, which is self-prompted, obviously, he cannot see that Frank would forgive him for what he's done. And he makes that final gesture in that vision of reaching out and wanting to take hands with Frank, but Frank is already in the doorway. So he dies in that sense unforgiven and unredeemed. And to me, that seems what happens too often. But on the upside is, it seems to me that Dad Lewis has made some kind of, as I say, transformation in his spirit and in his thinking, and so in some sense, he's ready to die in a different spiritual way than he would have been at the beginning of summer.
He does manage to make a peace with his daughter, I remember. That's a nice passage. When
he
admits
does.
That he could have done things better.
That's right, and he's able to articulate that quite specifically, and to tell her and to tell Mary, his wife, very, very directly what he feels about them. And I don't think he's ever done that before.
That's true. That's how it felt to me. Yeah. That passage actually leads me to my next question: is the novel's power having the spareness that you use to describe something that's so primal and human. With the amount of restraint that's in your writing, do you do a lot of self-editing?
Well, I do, and of course, I've been trying to write for over 40 years, and I guess that is part of what I've learned over the years. So it sort of comes initially that way now to me, but it's certainly my intent to write as sparely and as directly and as cleanly and as clearly as I can. I often said if I had a lyrical gift like so many other writers do, like James Agee, for example, I would maybe have written differently, but I don't think I have that. So I've gone the other direction and tried to make a virtue out of simplicity. And, of course, the problem with that is that it puts a great deal of emphasis and pressure on each word having to be exactly the right word. Each word cannot be sort of surrounded by gorgeous, dazzling prose, and so you have a little more leeway in what you can do. But if you're trying to write very simply, then even the most common words have to be exactly the right word. And it seems to me that if you can do that well, and I'm not saying I have, but that's the intent, then the words are like they've been minted just this morning. They're brand new just this morning. And they don't have all the baggage that they might have otherwise. So I'm not saying this very clearly, perhaps, but that's my hope anyway.
I think you've been entirely successful in doing that, actually. A lot of the people I told about this book were struck by the naturalism and the lack of frills or gimmickry in the story.
Right. Yeah, and other thing I would say about that is that I don't want to draw attention to the writing. I want the story to be the preeminent thing, and so I'm not trying to show off or anything. Instead of that, I'm trying to deliver a story that seems to me engaging, and I hope the reader will find that too. And so, well, as I say, that's the effort. And I'm trying not to ever jar the reader out of the narrative dream that you hope you put him or her in, so that there's a sort of continuous dream, I guess, that people would be in. I certainly want to feel that myself when I'm reading a book. If there's a mistake and you get jarred out of that feeling that you're having about the book, that's bothersome. That's irritating.
The only times that actually that happened to me with this novel I wasn't jarred out of the book because of something that was happening in the story. I was jarred out of the book because I was thinking about myself. So you can't help but put the book down and consider your life and where you're going just because of the story that you're telling. So it wasn't any gimmickry that made me put it down. Just I sometimes had to put it down just to take a second and think.
Well, that's interesting, and I appreciate you saying that. I take that as an encouragement. Thanks.
I've only got one final question for you. I hope it's not too vague for you. That I found that this novel has many stories, many voices, and ultimately many lessons. But if your readers took only one thing away from Benediction, what would you want it to be?
Oh, boy, that's...
Sorry, I knew that might be kind of a...
That's a huge question, and I'm not sure I've got an appropriate answer, but what I'm trying to convey is the power and the value of an ordinary life. This book is about the dailiness of life, I think. And, of course, somebody like Reverend Lyle, because of his ability with language, he could say when the police stop him, when he's looking in people's windows, yes, he could say something like, the precious ordinary. That's what he's looking at. Well, in some ways, that's what I'm trying to convey. Now, these moments that are often overlooked and we disregard them because they're not dramatic or out of the ordinary. But to me, if we can think about them in a more intense way, then they become significant. There's an old bromide that if anything looked at significantly becomes significant. Well, that's part of what I'm hoping to do.
I have to tell you then, it's funny you mentioned that passage because the first person I pushed this book on was my boss, and I said, I think this is a book that we should consider for the Spotlight program. And he sent me an email on the Saturday, a couple days after he'd started it, and he quoted that piece. He found the precious ordinary spot, so I think you've probably successfully shown some readers what you wanted to convey.
Well, thank you. I hope I have. Yeah.
I thank you very much for speaking to me. It's a pleasure to be able to sell this book, and I also have to tell you that if you didn't know it already, your book also made several grown men cry.
Well,
sometimes in public.
That's encouraging too. And let me just say to you and your colleagues, I'm just really pleased by the news from Canada. I'm just delighted by what I've been told, and it makes me want to move to Canada, I guess.
As long as you keep your book set in Holt, that'll be fine with us.
Okay.
Well, your book's currently sitting on our Best of 2013 table, and you're going to be moving into the Spotlight section very much. So it's a pleasure, again, a genuine pleasure to sell this book. Thank you very much for writing it.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Looking forward to the next one.